wild about having to do this.
He never is. He'll do it.
I know, I said, well, thank you for being here.
You know, he does a lot of legislative stuff. But he'll do it.
Yeah, no, it'd be great.
I don't know if I'm going to bother even asking this guy any questions. He's going to say what the guy said yesterday.
Yeah, I know, it doesn't.
So I don't see where this is. I do agree with almost everything in there.
Yeah, that's what, so May's gonna get up and make a statement about due process. Department with them on restoration.
Right.
Excuse me.
Hi, Ron. How you doing? Not too bad. You all set?
Quite the small plant.
I was gonna say, who's gonna put the plane?
That's a good one with your application. I didn't hear it.
How we doing? Great. I would say so.
Shall we? Let's show that we're ready.
Yeah.
You know, Sean, I think we should just run up and grab a couple of blue chairs. They're not all. Those look comfy.
That's what Dan's been looking for.
I might let you have the whole first day, Peter.
I've been here for 2 years. I'm just looking at like, okay, one witness and then 2 witnesses. That was just as one blue chair. That, indeed doesn't need it. Oh yeah.
When the time comes, these are name tags. They probably got them switch. You do. Just take the name tag, and the three of us will sit up there.
Good morning. I now call to order this session of the public hearing of the Land Use Planning Commission on zoning petition ZP779A, Wolfden Mt LLC's proposal, rezoning to allow for the development of Pickett Mountain Mine. My name is Everett Worcester. I'm the current chair of the Land Use Planning Commission. I represent Piscataquis County, and I'm the hearing officer for today's session. Leo, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning. My name is Leo Trudell of Worcester County.
Peter Bray, Penobscot County.
Gwen Hilton, Somerset County.
Stacy Byer, Executive Director for the Land Use Planning Commission.
Caleb Elwell, Assistant Attorney General and Counsel for the Commission.
Betsy Fitzgerald, Washington County.
Just as a reminder, we have a court reporter. Please speak distinctly and hopefully in a moderate level. At one time last evening, I saw her just throw her hands up like this. It's like, I give up. At this time, I ask all persons planning to testify today to please stand and raise your right hand. Do you affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the whole truth and nothing but the truth? Thank you. You may be seated. And we're going on with the third morning. Intervenor 2's testimony and evidence.
Good morning, Chairman Worcester, fellow commission members. I'm Dan Cusniers. I'm the Water Resources Program Manager for the Penobscot Indian Nation. Thought I could hear myself. I've served in this position for the last 30 years, overseeing water quality for the Penobscot Nation. Some of my duties involve we run a water quality laboratory on Indian Island. We do water quality sampling throughout the whole Penobscot watershed, on the tribe's trust lands, lakes and ponds and streams. Do a lot of studies, both ourselves and also with other agencies, looking at contaminant levels found in fish and other wild foods that are consumed by the tribe. We also do a lot of work using aquatic insects as indicators of water quality. Anything to do with FERC relicensing, spills, discharge permits, water quality regulations, basically anything that has the potential of affecting, water resources, concerns of the tribe. We have a program to oversee that and try to address those issues. And we try to do so based on the data that we collect. The Penobscot, or the Bunamwebskewi, are the people of the place of the White Rocks. The Penobscots are a member of the Wabanaki Confederacy. The Wabanaki are the Dawnland people, which refers to the people who live where the sunrise first touches each day. The Confederacy consists of the Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, and Mi'kmaq tribes. The Wabanaki have lived in this area since time immemorial and have a close relationship with the natural world. And I'm sorry, I've been forgetting to advance my slides. They are not advancing. There we go. Great. The Penobscot Nation has more than 4,900 acres of reservation land, which includes over 200 islands in the Penobscot River. In addition to the reservation, the tribe protects and manages over 90,000 acres of trust land that are shown here on this map in red, which are scattered around the state. We're going to be seeing a lot of maps today. This map shows the location of Wolfden's proposed mine. It also shows Penobscot and Maliseet lands shown here in tan. Also the location of Baxter State Park, Katahdin Woods and Water National Monument, and the lakes and ponds that we've been talking about over the last couple of days, and the West Branch, Mattawamkeag River, which goes into the Mattawamkeag and then into the Penobscot. Mount Chase is located here. This map shows the town of Mount Chase, but the mountain, or the mountain peak that we heard about yesterday, is located a little further up here, right around where the C on Pickett Mountain is. All these hashed marks, these white hash marks that go across the map, those are areas that are designated by NOAA, National Marine Fishery Service, as critical Atlantic salmon habitat. The West Branch Mattawamkeag, the East Branch Penobscot, the Main Stem Penobscot, and Mattagamon Law, all under Maine state law, have special designated use of sustenance fishing, which means that when calculating human health criteria in order to protect people from harmful chemicals, from toxics, including metals and other contaminants, they use a higher fish consumption rate. So typically 32 grams per day is used. In this case, for those waters that are designated for sustenance fishing, they have a 200 gram per day consumption rate. Additionally, portions of the West Branch of the Mattawamkeag, Penobscot, and East Branch of the Penobscot have been designated as outstanding river segments and are afforded special protection under Maine's Natural Resource Protection Act. The Bunna-Websquettek watershed, the Penobscot watershed, is the largest watershed in Maine. The watershed has 5 major sub-watersheds, one of which is the Mattawamkeag River, which is named for the gravel bar that is located or marks the confluence with the Penobscot River. The Penobscot watershed has and continues to sustain Penobscot people for thousands of years. The tribe is a riverine tribe, and their culture is deeply rooted in their relationship with the river. The Penobscot River considers the Penobscot Nation considers the river to be a living relative. They look at the river differently than a lot of people do. It's a living relative. In fact, in 2019, the tribe enacted a resolution to make the river a tribal citizen. It's also important to note that the tribe looks at the river, I think, a lot differently than society does. They don't divide it into things like the main stem of the Penobscot, the West Branch, the East Branch, all those things. Historically, the tribe thought of the whole watershed as the river, and there are places along it that have names, and those names are associated with either some sort of navigation, some significant thing that would help people understand where they are, or activities that occurred there, things such as Matamuscontis, meaning place of many alewives. So a lot of places have names that are associated with activities that take place there. The river is a source of life that provides tribal citizens with wild foods, including fish, wildlife, plants, medicines, and traditional cultural lifeways. The Penobscot have treaty reserve sustenance fishing rights within reservation waters. And there's just a couple of slides showing some of these cultural practices. The Penobscot's traditional cultural lifeways did not fade away with the intrusion of industry and development, but are still practiced today. Unfortunately, the tribe is unable to fully carry out sustenance fishing because of health advisories due to dioxins, PCBs, mercury, and other contaminants that are present in fish. Historically, fish and seafood comprised about 45% of Wabanaki people's diets. Even as Penobscot River is subjected to contamination from industrial pollution, local fish is important for diet and nutrition. But Atlantic salmon and brook trout, as well as many other species, are more than just food. They are embedded in the culture and traditional beliefs of the Penobscot. The Penobscot are connected with salmon and all creatures for survival. Water quality in the Penobscot watershed has seen tremendous improvements over the past 30 years, as I have observed. Historic problems such as large sheets of foam covering the river, unpleasant odors, low dissolved oxygen, high bacteria levels, algal blooms where the whole river turns green. Now those are things of the past. We've made remarkable improvements. And this is partially demonstrated by the upgrades of water quality classes for hundreds of miles of stream segments. And much of this is based on water quality data that the Penobscot Nation has collected, which has shown that higher classes are being met, and as part of a kind of an anti-backsliding, we've made recommendations for those water classifications to be upgraded to protect that higher level. So I should explain a little bit about Maine's water classification system. There are 4 classes of streams. There's AA, which is the highest classification, A, B, and C. And this map here, it looks kind of like a spider web. There's a lot to look at here. But if you, this area down here in green, that's roughly where the main stem of the Penobscot River comes up and goes into the east and west branches. That is now Class B, but historically that was Class C, the lowest class. So we've seen a lot of, the whole main stem of the Penobscot went from being Class C to everything is now Class B. And then many sections of the west branch have also been upgraded to the higher classification. Most of the streams in the watershed that are tributaries that come into the Penobscot historically were either Class C or Class B. Most of those are now Class A. So the green is Class B, blue is Class A, and AA are kind of these purple colors. So again, many of the streams have been upgraded from Class C or B to Class A and even AA. Class AA waters are the highest classification, and they are considered to be outstanding natural resources. No discharges or dams are allowed in those waters. Class A waters, which again are the ones in blue, are the second highest class. And they're also very high quality, and they require that discharges to them must be as clean as natural background levels. So any discharge that goes into a Class A water has to be as good as that receiving water is. So as you can see, nearly all of the streams in the vicinity of the proposed mine are Class A, with some AA streams in the East Branch watershed and the lower Mattawamkeag watershed. So as we zoom in closer to Wolfden's proposed mine site, you can see from the blue color, so here's the mine, you can see all of these streams that are in the vicinity are all Class A waters. The dissolved oxygen criteria for Class A waters is intended protective of all stages of salmonid species, such as salmon and brook trout, including spawning and incubation. Young salmonids require high dissolved oxygen, cool temperatures, and are very sensitive to acidity and metals. Acid mine drainage can easily upset this fragile environment during the spawning season, which could lead to the demise of these fisheries. Again, Maine's laws require discharges to Class A must be equal to or better than the existing water quality of the receiving waters.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Go back to that slide a minute. What do the triangles represent?
I don't know.
Okay,
I wish I did.
That's
so
two
this
of
is,
us.
This is from Maine DEP's data layer for classification of waters, and I'm just not sure what they are. Yeah, I'm not sure. Very observant. So while Wolfden has not included specifics about the ore concentrator or tailings facilities, they have proposed that there will be in either Stacyville, Hersey, or Patton. So this map shows that all of the streams in the Stacyville area are Class A, except a few very small streams that are shown here in green that are Class B. So there's streams there and here, and this is the Stacyville border. Maine law prohibits the direct discharge of pollutants into waters with a drainage area of less than 10 square miles because of the lack of adequate dilution. In the following maps, I've used USGS stream stats to measure the drainage area of the Class B streams in Stacyville. And you can see here, so this area that's in yellow, that is the whole drainage area of each of these Class B segments. And it doesn't show up too well, but on the bottom, the mileage or the drainage area is 0.95, which is less than 1 square mile, well below the required 10 square miles for a discharge. And then this Class B stream has a drainage area of 1.42 square miles. And this stream, Class B stream, has a drainage area of 0.4 square miles. So all of the Class B segments, or Class B streams that are located in Stacyville have a drainage area well below 10 square miles, and therefore are prohibited from receiving direct discharge. When you look at Hersey, you can see that all the waters in Hersey are blue, which means they're all Class A waters. So any discharges to these streams need to meet background levels or be equal to or better than the receiving stream. And likewise, all streams in Patton, as you can see from the blue, are Class A streams. So the take-home message of these maps is that Wolfden seemingly cannot discharge to most waters around the mine site or the towns proposed for the ore concentrator and tailings management facility. And for those that it could discharge to, it would have to treat to levels that are equal to or better than the receiving water. And groundwater discharge also must meet these same background levels, which we think is a very high burden. Not moving. There we go. Here are just some photos of Pleasant Lake and Grass Pond, both beautiful places. In 2000, the year 2000, the Gulf of Maine distinct population segment of Atlantic salmon were listed as endangered under the Endangered Species Act. With that listing, areas of critical habitat were designated by NOAA, National Marine Fisheries Service. These waters, which I showed on that earlier map, which had the cross sections, kind of the white cross sections going through them. Those include the Penobscot River watershed, including the West Branch Mattawamkeag River and its tributary waters. These waters are deemed to contain the physical and/or biological features that are essential to the conservation and restoration of endangered Atlantic salmon. Significant efforts have been made to help restore Atlantic salmon and other sea-run diadromous fish to the Penobscot watershed. One of these is the Penobscot River Restoration Project, of which Penobscot Nation was a partner. This project involved the purchase and removal of 2 main stem dams located in Great Works and Vesey, and a river-like bypass channel built around the 3rd in Howland, with the ultimate no loss of power generation, but much improved fish access. These photos here, or these images, show that on the left-hand side, you can see what before the dam removals, what the access for sea-run fish was like into the Penobscot watershed. And you can see from kind of that pink area down in the bottom that the fish really couldn't get above those dams. Once those dams came out, it vastly improved access to over 2,000 miles of historic river and stream habitat for Atlantic salmon and other sea-run species. And excuse the typo on this because it says 1,000, but it's actually more like 2,000 miles. For almost 4 decades, the Penobscot Nation has worked with federal and state agencies, including NOAA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and Maine Department of Marine Resources, to co-manage and help restore Atlantic salmon and other diadromous fish species. These efforts, including stocking Atlantic salmon fry in the East Branch of the Penobscot and the Mattawamkeag watershed, and adult Atlantic salmon in the East Branch of the Penobscot. So historically, there were about 75 to 100,000 adult Atlantic salmon that would return to the Penobscot watershed every year. That is greatly diminished now. The Penobscot hosts the largest, but the Penobscot still hosts the largest run of Atlantic salmon left in the United States, with recent returns ranging from 1,000 to 1,500. And this year, we have so far over 1,600 fish that have returned, as can be seen in the bottom graph. The success of salmon recovery is likely very dependent upon returns of other sea-run fish species. And the photograph in the upper right-hand corner is at the Milford Fish Lift, and you can see all the different fish species that are returning. So you have the large one there being Atlantic salmon, you have sea lamprey, American shad, striped bass, and river herring. And as seen in the graph in the bottom right-hand corner, before the dams were taken out, river herring were largely absent from the Penobscot, being able to get up to the Milford. And as of this year, we had 5.5 million river herring returned to the Penobscot. I would like to make a note here that, I reviewed Mr. Stewart's pre-filed testimony about aquatic resource, the summarized aquatic resources, and he made no mention in the pre-filed testimony about critical habitat for Atlantic salmon in the West Branch of the Mattawamkeag and its tributaries. The vast amount of resources to restore Atlantic salmon in the Penobscot watershed reflects that this habitat represents the best chance for Atlantic salmon recovery in the United States. To allow a metallic mineral mine to be developed so close to the headwaters of the West Branch Mattawamkeag would unnecessarily put these efforts and success at risk. The proposed mine, as we've heard over the last couple of days, we believe has a high likelihood of creating acid mine drainage. not going to spend time to talk about what acid mine drainage is. I think that's been well covered. But the low pH water from acid mine drainage, not only is the pH harmful, but the heavy metals are leached out as well. And that can be both as it goes through the ground, but also in the streams themselves. The low pH can cause metals that are bound up in sediment to then become available. They get on the gills of the fish and interfere with their respiration. And as Dr. Mice talked about yesterday, you also can get a red-orange precipitate from acid mine drainage that coats the gravel bottom. And that gravel bottom is really important for the salmonid species that are living in there, because when they're eggs or they're fry, they're actually living right in the gravel. So it smothers and destroys those clean gravels that are needed for spawning and incubation. So Atlantic salmon thrive in waters with a pH range of between 6.5 and 8.2, but receiving waters from AMD can be like down between 2.0 to 4.5, which are well below Maine's water quality standards, which are 6.5, to 9. Studies have shown that moderately acidic water can be fatal for young Atlantic salmon and affects the sensitive period of their lives as they transition from par to smolts to head to salt water. So you remember with something like an Atlantic salmon, when they're born or when they hatch out, they're very small. They grow up in that environment in fresh water. Now their body has to adapt to going to live in salt water. So there's a process that they have to go through called smoltification. And acid mine drainage and low pH water can affect that process. So even short duration, moderate acidic conditions can reduce their tolerance of salt water, cause aluminum accumulation in their gills. Another study found that mine pollution can actually cause Atlantic salmon to even avoid waters. Moving on to brook trout. Maine is by far the most important state in the eastern United States for brook trout. It's the only state with extensive, intact, self-reproducing populations in lakes and ponds, and is the last stronghold for stream-dwelling populations of wild brook trout. Because of these populations, brook trout are an economically important sport fish in Maine. People come from all over the place to fish for brook trout here. Lots of people from Maine fish for brook trout. They're wonderful to eat. And they're also very economically important for tribal guides who make their living taking people out to catch them. Brook trout are also an important sustenance species for tribal citizens. And one of the really important parts of this is because they contain lower levels of contaminants than do many other species, such as those found in main stem rivers that have been contaminated by past industrial users. So in the Penobscot River, as I mentioned, we have advisories in place for things like dioxins and PCBs and mercury. Much of that comes from historical, discharges that have accumulated in the watershed. So tribal members know this and try to go carry out their sustenance practices elsewhere and go to a lot of these, smaller streams and places that don't have discharges to them in order to catch brook trout. In fact, Maine CDC's health advisories are the least restrictive for like the sensitive populations of women of childbearing age and young children for brook trout. Like brook trout are one of the few species that they recommend people can eat. So the cream of the crop of Maine's brook trout ponds are the state heritage fish waters. These ponds, as we heard over the last couple of days, are ponds with brook trout or Arctic char that have never been stocked or haven't been stocked in the last 25 years. So there are 3 state heritage fish waters in the vicinity of the proposed Pickett mine site: Pleasant Lake, Mud Lake, and Grass Pond. I've been to all of these, and they're really beautiful gems. They're just gorgeous places. Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife states that the lakes, quote, support healthy populations of salmonids and smelt, and it's vitally important to protect the tributaries as well as the lakes, since they contain an abundance of spawning and rearing habitat. Despite the evidence of the outstanding nature of these cold water fisheries adjacent to the mine, the Wolfden application falsely states that it relies upon outdated surveys from the 1950s and falsely states that Mud and Pleasant Lake are not good cold water fisheries, and makes and the application mischaracterizes more recent data, saying it suggests potential rather than existing actual outstanding fisheries. As with Atlantic salmon and other fish, acid mine drainage is a major threat to brook trout, especially in streams with low buffering capacity, such as those found in this vicinity around the mine site. Because they're very clean waters, do not have a lot of the things in them that will help neutralize that acid as it comes into the waters. Pennsylvania State Report states that brook trout can tolerate a pH range of between 5.95, that being adult ones, but at either end of the range, fish become stressed. And young fish and eggs are less tolerant, much less tolerant, and they can, as I mentioned before, can get gill damage. An entire age class of fish can die. Metal toxicity from acid mine drainage is another common stream killer. Because metal toxicity can increase with low pH, small amounts of these metals can stress or cause death, especially in young and developing fish. And then acid mine drainage from coal and metal mines has contributed to the declines of brook trout in their mid-Atlantic and Appalachian historic range, and rendered large numbers of streams in those areas unlivable for brook trout. The Eastern Brook Trout Joint Venture estimates that AMD is impacting about 2,500 miles of rivers and streams in Pennsylvania. That is all. Thank you.
The applicant's cross-examination.
Good morning. We appreciate Mr. Kuznier's testimony. He has testified eloquently about the importance of the Penobscot watershed, and we agree. And we agree that Mr. Kuznier's is best positioned to speak about the cultural importance of the watershed to the Penobscot Nation. We appreciate the ongoing efforts of the Penobscot Nation to improve water quality and the surrounding habitats, and we look forward to finding opportunities to partner with the tribes on this important work. Thank you.
Intervenor one's cross-examination.
I don't have any questions for this witness, and I agree with just about everything he said.
It's now the staff's opportunity to ask questions. Betsy?
I'm just curious. You talked a lot about how many fish went up the river and down the river. How do you count fish?
Good question. So currently, the way, like those graphs that I showed you with the salmon and river herring and all that. At the Milford Dam, there's a fish lift, like an elevator that was put in. So the fish can't go by the dam. They have to go into that elevator. They get lifted up. They go through a raceway. And in that facility, there are fish counters. So like the smaller fish, there are tubes that they go through that have like detectors in them that count the fish. Or they also have ways to send the fish into another, like with the Atlantic salmon, they send them up another chute and into a holding tank. So that's, yeah, they have counters that do that. I think when you start getting huge numbers of fish, like when you have 5.5 million alewives coming through, it gets a little harder because they're all trying to go through small tubes.
Thank you.
Leo?
You had given a range of pH as it pertained to the, I'll say the optimum or the ability for fish to live within that range. And at both ends, the fish would be strained, as you stated.
Right.
My question is, do you know what the pH is currently of the river and the waterways?
Which river? The Penobscot River?
The waterways that would be affected if there were to be some sort of discharge.
We have not tested the water up in that area, so we'd have to look at the data from studies that show, what it is in that area. Most of the waters we find, like in the Penobscot and surrounding areas, are usually, in the high 6s.
And I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway, the question, and that is, do you know how much discharge would greatly affect it, or minimally affect it?
With acidity, it really depends on how acidic it is and the stream's ability to neutralize that. So I'll give you an example on some lakes and ponds on some tribal trust lands. We have some places you've heard of acid rain before. So in the springtime, after you have a lot of snow that's accumulated and it melts, there's a lot of acid that can come into the system. So we have some lakes and ponds that, because of their chemistry and geology of, the surrounding area, they're able to absorb, essentially. They're able to absorb that acid without causing a significant change in the pH. But the streams, as Dr. Mays was talking about yesterday, a lot of the streams in this area are very clean and have very low acid neutralizing capacity. So it doesn't take much acid in order to cause, like you see that change in the water. So the water can't absorb it and not change.
Very good, thank you.
I would like to have seen a pre and post on the watershed. And I get the impression that you're suggesting that this whole watershed has been greatly improved over time. But I would have liked to have seen a photograph, let's say from 1900, and a photograph more recently.
I've only been there for 30 years.
Yeah. Well, I'll take 30 years.
Yeah.
What do you attribute the cleanup of this area? Was it something you did, or the tribe did, or the state did?
I think it's a combination of lots of things. So, one huge part, obviously, from a long time ago, in the 70s, we have the Clean Water Act. So we stopped treating rivers as open sewers and, put water quality standards in place, discharge licenses with permits and limits on them to drive that down. And those continue to get better. So a lot of the big problems that we used to have, we're not really seeing now, because a lot of the, it's a better understanding and just a lot of cleanup that's happened. In the Penobscot, I mean, frankly, one of the things that has made a big difference, I hate to say this, but the paper mills have shut down. So, not that that's a desirable thing, but it's a reality. There's a lot of loading that was going into the rivers that's not happening now. But even prior to that, when some of the mills were still operating, their discharges became much more clean than they had been, over previous years.
That was what I suspected. It was the loss of industry that affected this greatly, probably on the positive side.
In part, yeah. I said, I think it improved greatly just because of better permits, putting permit limits in to help drive things down so that the river didn't turn green.
And then I guess stopping the log drives apparently was a big positive. I do miss that. I always enjoyed that. Marveled at the people's skill in running around on those logs with picks. But and I never quite understood what chemicals came out of the wood that caused it to be a negative. But
I think a lot of it had to do with just all that wood being in the river, and as it goes to break down, it uses up all the oxygen, and it kind of smothers the bottom, and changes the substrate and the channels. So, but yeah, I remember coming up on the Kennebec with my grandfather and him when I was just a little kid. He said, "Remember this, because this is the last time you'll see it," because I had been used to seeing those river drives. And he pointed that out. He said, "This is the last one that's ever going to happen." And it kind of made a mark in my mind.
thank you. We take a break? It says take a break. What's that?
Don't jinx it.
No, don't bring it up, right? You're right.
You can do either. There's a microphone right there, and you push the button and the red comes on. I think it's easy to just sit there. That I am. Together? Same time? Okay. Oh, okay.
Works for me, whatever you want, sir. This is.
It's just like a state testimony. It's either cramped and hot or freezing.
Well, I'm trying to remember. They may have put in a big pellet boiler here.
Did they? They just get it going.
Well, they definitely are not killing us with heat.
No, they're not.
And, it's, 9:15, probably a little later. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you really start to notice
opposite.
Oh, really? It gets warm? Yeah.
No,
Oh,
no,
it gets cold. No, it gets cold now, yeah.
And I don't know if it's my, I'm now definitely advanced middle age, or if it's an offshoot of the treatment I underwent, but I get cold very easy.
I don't work in the pharmacy, but I like to keep, I mean,
About 55.
55. It's like, guys, you know, get some women working and they get hot. I'm like, oh, listen, go stay outside. I can't put any more clothes on.
Yeah, I'd have to have a sweater and a jacket.
Yeah, I would have put a sweater on. I have got to get the Irish wool from Ireland, and they're worth it. Every penny.
That helps.
Every penny. Yeah. You get wet, doesn't matter. Breathe.
Well, they have all these synthetics today, but I'm not so sure they beat a lot of the older products.
No,
you know?
no.
I always liked wool when I was hunting because if it got wet, it would still keep you warm.
Yep. Like merino wool, I think is
Yeah,
what it's called.
yeah.
That's really nice.
Yeah.
The other one's a little too itchy for me. But
Yeah, I don't like the itch at all. So were you 3 days a week in the pharmacy?
Two. Yeah. Two's enough. We do Thursday and work Friday, Saturday. So that leaves Monday and Sunday to do everything else.
Well,
So we're back today and get cleaning kegs and get some stuff carbonated. Tiny thing coming Friday that should be put on a lot. Shouldn't pond. I think anyways.
so you're brewing all your stuff right there?
Right there, yeah.
Are you the head brewmaster?
It's me. I don't know if it is designated, but that's what I do. It was a nice ride out. A little foggy taking on the highway, but coming out of Patton was just beautiful.
Yeah. This is a
So is that the place?
That's me.
I drove in there several times and would look at the time and I never could remember. Next time I'm taking a picture.
yeah.
Well, there's a car there. He's
Yeah.
knocking, come on in. Or usually.
Yeah.
How do you think it's been going anyways? You had Monday?
We started out Monday.
Monday, okay.
And Monday was a good day. We were getting some questions from the commissioners that make you wonder if they really understand the proposal. And I guess the biggest issue is the application consists of primarily preliminary information. And when you file for this permit under chapter 200, you have to do like 2 years of baseline studies.
Right.
And then, of course, you're going to redo all the information based on that better set of information. Of course, you have to understand that opponents speak in terms of the process and this, that, and the next thing. What they really want to do is kill the project. So they say, well, this isn't enough information and that isn't enough information and they really should do more testing and they should do more of this. All of which costs money. And if you don't get the zone change, you don't get that money. And with this commission in particular, they love to say, well, there's no development pressure because we don't get any applications for like subdivision. Well, the rules are so onerous. You have to be an idiot to go through the process. For instance, if you're on a lake, Elgin, they still expect you to dedicate half your shore frontage, open space.
Yep.
Okay.
So you can put a dog.
You gotta have 2 or 3 lots, 400 or 500 feet open.
Only in evidence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Turner will start.
Good morning, commissioners and staff. As you can probably tell, this is the first time I've ever done this before you guys. I usually sit in the back and keep my eyes, my mouth shut and ears open, but today I got to talk. So, anyway, I hope you had a chance to just cruise through this thing, because I am not going to sit here and read word for word. But the two main things that I want to get across is that this is a multi-use area. I mean, it is, all aspects of it is, and that there's a lot of other different activities taking place there, the turbines, the other stuff that, so it is not just a playground for a bunch of other people. So we've been like very similar to like Route 11 is, one of the major trucking routes in Maine. And of course, the other thing about this whole thing is that is the economic value it has to this region, part of the state of Maine. It is just I don't think anybody really can fathom it right today, but if this should happen to come to fruition, I think it would be a wonderful thing. Okay, I'm currently, in the past, I've been involved with quite a few conservation sales. We got Township 16, which is now in the Nature Conservancy. We've got the Lakeville parcel, which is now part of the Down East Lakes Land Trust. And then Township Range 1, Range 4, Wells, which just currently was conveyed to IF&W. And I'm also currently involved with a number of projects that I cannot mention where, but if they all should happen to come to fruition, that would mean tens of thousands of more acres of conserved land. So, and what I like about, whether I can believe in this conservation movement or not is irrelevant, but what I like about this is that they pay for the land. They pay for that right to use it the way they want to. And I think that's, I guess what I would like to have, please give Wolfden the chance to prove it can do a good project before the DEP. I mean, because this is just a rezoning, and they have to go through quite a few more steps after this, assuming it's approved. But thank you.
Good morning. My name is Joel Fitzpatrick. I was born in Wolfden, Maine, and then lived in Patten, Maine for 27 years. I've been married for 34 years. I have 3 adult daughters, and for 26 years, I owned and operated Patten Truck. I now operate Katahdin Brew Works, which is a local brewery, just a small brewery, and work as a pharmacist for the Katahdin Valley Health Center, which is a rural health center in Patten, Maine. Since 1996, when we moved to Patten, the 2 mills in Millinocket have closed. The starch factory in Island Falls have closed. The plywood mill in Patten, Maine has closed. The population in 1996, I was told, was about 1,200 people, maybe a little bit shy of that. Now the population is about 880. So there's really no argument that the population and the employment opportunities in the northern Penobscot area have declined. In the past 5 years, I've experienced more activity in the Patten area. It would be great to see this continue. More infrastructure is needed for the greater Katahdin area to support any expanding or new business. I believe that the Pickett Mountain project could potentially add substantial value to the greater Katahdin area. Wolfden will be required to meet all state of Maine mining laws and DEP regulations. I ask this question: if a person or business can abide and perform within the laws and regulations set forth by the state of Maine or any of its governing bodies, then why shouldn't they be allowed to operate? Wolfden land parcels should be rezoned if it can follow the Maine rules and laws. This does not guarantee that Wolfden will be cleared to mine the land parcel. I think the Patent area is the most overlooked area in Maine. It has beautiful views, lakes, rivers, mountains, and other natural resources. I think the National Monument, Wolfden, and other businesses have great potential to rejuvenate the northern Penobscot region. It would be great to be able to use all of the area resources responsibly to benefit all. Thank you.
No, that concludes our presentation.
Beyond wishing that Mr. Fitzpatrick had brought some samples, we don't have any questions, and thank the witnesses for coming today.
LUPC staff.
And I'm not sure who to ask this of. What have you seen? So your census data shows up to, I think, 2020 that you quote there. And or maybe a better question is, how much, are you seeing an influx of people and businesses since 2020? I guess since COVID even.
No, you turned it on. There you go. You're on.
I'm on? Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, it's sad to say COVID did help our area quite a bit. We'll see with a few more violent winters if they continue to stay. That'll be interesting. The people that came in, I don't know if they're going to stay. I think it was a nice place. When you're living in New York City or Boston or whatever, when you come up and you don't have to see your neighbor, it's kind of a nice thing, especially with all the fear that was going on. Businesses, a few, but not many. Not a few. I don't really think we've seen. I'd say not many.
Okay.
How would you characterize the location of Pickett Mountain in terms of the unorganized territory? Any one of you?
Well, personally, I think as far as the mine site itself, it's a minor part of the unorganized territory, very minor. Other uses that up there take up a lot more land than that does.
Would you characterize it as being on the fringe of the UT?
Personally, yes, I would, because of Rule 11.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
Well, we've had some discussion about whether it's on the fringe or not. I was just wondering what your opinion was.
Yeah, that's because I know, the Hersey area is being logged now for the last 20-some years, and Route 11 goes right through it. And
in terms of the land that Haynes owns, is it on the edge of that land?
it would be on the edge, I guess you'd want to say, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yes.
Anyone else? Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
All right. We're now at the applicant's redirect. This is going so fast I can't keep up with where I am in the paperwork.
Well, that's a perfect lead into my request, Mr. Chair. We have 20 minutes for redirect, and since we're well ahead of schedule and didn't use our cross for panel 4, request that we have 15 minutes additional time. We'll try to keep it below 30 minutes, but just want to make sure we cover topics that came up and are responsive to commission questions.
That's fine. What's that? I need to get an opinion from intervener 2, whether they're comfortable with that added time or not.
Well, I mean, we haven't been given any opportunity for redirect, but if there's something that we might want to recross on, maybe we would ask for the opportunity to do that afterwards. Otherwise, we would, object to this.
Okay, I'll let you redirect.
Or cross.
Whatever it was you said.
Well, we may need a break to think about it after they're done to just.
Okay, that worked too.
Sorry, so what was the time? Is it 30, 35?
35, but I'm
35.
sure we'll keep it below 30.
Okay.
May, do we have one copy left for the? Well, maybe we'll borrow staff's when we do the, okay. I think we're all set. All right, good morning. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Finley. There was some testimony yesterday about, and I probably caused some of the confusion in my questions of Dr. Mace, but there was a testimony by Dr. Mace that there's the risk of water flowing out of the mine during mine operation. Could you comment on that?
Yes. So the mine, you can think of the advancement of the ramp down through that squiggly part into the depths where they would access ore, but that opening acts just like a water well, which is to say, initially, and I'll use my hand puppets here, but initially there is a level at which the groundwater exists naturally. And once they start advancing the mine workings or the ramp, they'll actually create an opening in the ground, which is just like you would do with a water well. And as Mr. Ouellette mentioned early on, that the pressure, air pressure in that opening is atmospheric. It's much lower than the pressure of the water outside of it. And effectively, water will flow downhill. That's kind of the bottom line. So as long as there's nothing outside of the mine working that exerts a condition where the water level is lower than the mine workings, all water will flow into the mine.
And what about the presence of fissures or faults? Would that then allow, if those existed, would water flow out of the mine during operation?
Yeah, so fractures or faults which were mentioned yesterday by Dr. Mace, can act one of two ways. They can either act as a barrier to the flow of water, and that depends on the nature of the minerals that are associated with those features, or they can act as a conduit. So again, the ruling principle is as long as the water level in the mine, which is of course pumped out in order to continue working, is lower than the groundwater level, the water can only flow into the mine. So if, let's just say there is a fracture or a fault, and it acts as a conduit, then that only means that the water can flow in faster. Water cannot flow uphill. That's really the basic requirement.
Thank you. And we also have had a lot of discussion, and we discussed with Dr. Mace whether it's possible to prevent or to minimize acid mine drainage at the Pickett project, and a suggestion that all of the mine walls would essentially be leaching. Can you comment on that?
Absolutely. And May, if you could please pull up the... This is one of the images from my presentation the other day. And I just ask you to focus on the lower right-hand corner, which is a representation of underground workings. So the black squiggly line that runs vertically is what is called the ramp. And as Mr. Dudek demonstrated, there is evidence that there's a portion of the rock that would be part of this mining activity that has very low potential to be acid generating. And the intent then of the development of this ramp, this vertical squiggly line, would be to place that in the rock with the least likelihood of being acid generating. So that in and of itself is a mitigation measure. But it's also important to understand that while this ramp is being advanced and developed, there'll be samples collected of materials coming out of that. And there's two reasons for that. One is we want to understand what their geochemical properties of those materials are as the ramp is advanced. But at some point in time, all of that material, assuming it meets the requirements that would be established under Chapter 200 for placing material back underground, would end up back underground. So that is also a mitigation measure to understand what the geochemical properties of those materials are. There's also actually a third possibility or potential that that material actually has neutralizing capacity associated with it. So not only would it have the benefit of not being stored on surface long-term, regardless of what its geochemical characteristics are, but it also has the potential to act as a neutralizing source should there be PAG rock observed underground. Okay, so we've talked about the ramp. The horizontal black lines are tunnels that head toward the ore. So this is just to access where the ore body exists. Now, the majority of the tunnel, we anticipate, again, based on the information available to Mr. Dudek, that most of that rock is non-acid generating. We're still going to test it as that tunnel gets advanced toward the ore body. And we talked about the sulfide alteration halo. Should that exist, and in some parts of this deposit it does, in some parts it does not, should that material or that zone exist, we'll have to go through it. And we will measure its geochemical properties so we understand what they are as the rock is taken from the ground. Okay, so the tunnel is advanced to the ore body, and then mining starts, and that's where features called stopes, and Mr. Roulette can speak to this more clearly than I can, but the stopes are advanced and they basically mine all that material out. Now, it's very important, we've talked about this a lot over the last couple of days, for you to understand this zone where there is some places where the pyrite content may be as high as 50%. So 50% of the material is pyrite. As I mentioned in my testimony the other day, I don't need to test that. I know that material is packed, but it's also the ore that is being extracted. So all of that material will be excavated, mined out, and removed from the system, basically. That all goes to the concentrator for processing. Now, the stopes this activity actually occurs on a fairly rapid basis, which is to say they advance the stope, mine the material out, and they backfill it right away. So they don't stand open for a long period of time, and we're talking generally less than a month. Okay, so one of the other things that we talked about that's important in generation of acid rock drainage or acid mine drainage is time. So yes, there's oxygen, yes, there's water, but you also have to have enough time for the oxidation reaction to occur. So less than a month is actually a pretty short period of time for that reaction in general. We're going to understand that also because we're going to characterize the geochemical properties of that material. Their objective is to remove all of the ore. And in fact, just because of the kind of the way you have to do it, they'll actually remove more than just the ore. So these stopes are going to over-excavate effectively in that zone. And that's not to say there isn't the potential for there to be mine walls in that area that contain sulfides. That probably will happen at some point through the mining process. But the fact that it's backfilled, the fact that a portion of the backfill is cemented rockfill, those are all mitigation measures. And plus that we are doing geochemical characterization during the mining activity allows them to plan whether or not they actually need to amend the backfill and add more neutralizing potential or other measures, mitigation measures. So I think that's pretty important to understand in terms of the likelihood of acid generation or acid rock drainage occurring in the mining activity. Don't anticipate it in the ramp going down or in most of the tunnel length going into the ore zone.
And Dr. Mace also concluded that, in her view, this deposit had a high likelihood of acid mine drainage risks. Do you agree with her conclusion?
I don't, and the reason I don't is because of the information that Mr. Dudek has developed, and I think I mentioned this in my testimony the other day. Exploration, development of a geologic model of a deposit is far out in front of where typical geochemical, environmental geochemical characterization takes place. That's the normal state of the business. So what Mr. Dudek has the advantage of is a very large set of data, some of which you saw, but equally important, a clear understanding based on the available information of what the geology is. And as he's described it, there absolutely are zones where there's sulfide oxidation. But equally important, there are zones where he has not seen sulfide oxidation. And again, the intent is to place mine workings in the zones with the least likelihood for there to be acid rock drainage. So at a high level, you characterize this deposit, this volcanogenic massive sulfide deposit, and place it in the context of some of the work that Dr. Mace has done in the past, and you could reach that conclusion that it has a high likelihood. But the details of this specific deposit suggest that's not the case.
Thank you. Mr. Willett, Dr. Finley talked about the typical time frame for backfilling the stopes. Can you just comment on that, and then the typical amount of time that the tunnels, the horizontal lines on the slide, how long before those are backfilled?
Yeah, so as Dr. Finley had mentioned, it's typically, within a month. But so we're proposing to mine smaller blocks that'll typically be open for around a period of a week before they're backfilled. And then in terms of the drifts, because there are several of these smaller mining blocks along the length of a drift or tunnel, one of those horizontal tunnels would be theoretically open for, 4 to 5 months, somewhere around there. So not overly long durations.
Thank you. And a question came up on whether there would be crushing of the ore underground. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, certainly. So within the petition, we described that any crushing activities would be underground. And I think it's worth noting that we're not crushing. The product of the crusher is still a relatively coarse rock. So that surface areas that are exposed to generate ARD are still limited.
And how long would the crushed material remain underground?
So typically we'd have about a one-day inventory, and then that inventory would then be brought up to the surface ore pad, where about a 1 week stand would be the largest inventory we have up there.
Thank you. And there was also a concern raised yesterday about the potential impact of a drop in the water table level and the potential after the mine is closed for a portion of the mine after it's flooded to be re-exposed if there's a drop in the water table. And it was also discussed that the ore deposit goes very close to the surface. So can you comment on that concern?
Yeah, I sure can. So the deposit does express on surface. It comes to the top, but it's worth noting, and it actually shows in this diagram as well, that the mining excavation does not go to surface. So the very top of the mine excavations would be roughly around 100 feet vertically from the surface deposit, well below any potential fluctuation of that water table.
There was also although the commissioner's not here, there was a question on contractors and why you would have contractors in the early stage of construction of the project. Can you just clarify that?
Yeah, thank you. There is a little bit of confusion there. So when I was speaking about the early stage contractors, those are related to the mining specific activities, and they would be hired to ultimately work with local workforce, increase skill set and experience in the mining operation. The contractors that were discussed by the commissioner were related to the construction activities. And I'd like to just confirm that construction activities would indeed be hired through local contractors because those skill sets do exist in the state, and it only makes sense for us to hire, as near the project as possible with skill sets that understand the location.
There was also a question, I believe it was Commissioner Hilton, wondered if we had a photograph of the head frame. So can you just describe the two photographs that have been provided?
Of course. So there are, I believe the two first photographs, have you got them? The two first photographs are examples of head frames. So actually the head frame photographs may be at the end. So this is an example of a nearby head frame. This is actually the Caribou Mine. And just to describe it a little bit, it's a tall building, in this case 120 feet tall. The two wheel at the top of the head frame are just pulleys. There's ropes that go over those pulleys and vertically down into a shaft connected to buckets essentially called skips.
And then the second head frame example?
So this is another example of a head frame. This is actually a tourist attraction, and it's, again, a similar type of building. It's just a tall structure. The sheaves or the pulleys at the top of it are hidden by a top of the building in this image, but this is another example of a head frame.
And then go ahead.
I ask just a quick question. So is there lighting on this?
So the lighting that you would see in these head frames are typically around the entrances, the doors around the bottom, and their downward facing lighting. In our case, we would do the same. So like the entrances they would only have lighting where needed for, pedestrian traffic, and they would only be used as needed.
So FAA doesn't require lighting at the top? Is that correct?
We actually had a review of the FAA requirements, and it's typically, I guess.
200 feet, maybe?
Yeah, 200 feet
Yeah.
is the limit there, and we're 120.
Okay, right.
I think also there was a question about, just a picture of what the mine might look like. So can you comment on the photographs that were provided and just what they are? And I'm just, in the interest of time, just identify what these photographs are, and if we have time at the end, we can walk you through the facilities.
Great. So this first picture, this is sort of an overview of the half-mile mine that is in outside of Miramichi, New Brunswick. And if you scroll to the second picture, this is just a zoomed-in image. The half-mile mine was broken up into two segments. This is a zoomed-in image of the water management area. And if you go to the third image, this is a zoomed-in image of the actual mining area, which is inclusive of a portal, ore rock storage pad, waste rock storage pad, and then some infrastructure.
Thank you. And we'll be happy if there's time at the end to talk in greater detail about that. Doug, I wanted to turn to you for a minute. There have been some questions on the pH, if we have any information on the pH of the surrounding water bodies. Can you comment on that?
Sure, yes, we do. There's been to date 11 surface water samples taken from places like Pickett Mountain Pond, Pleasant Lake, the West Branch, the Mattawamkeag. Some of those water bodies have more than one sample. And the results are the range of pH is 6.3 to 7. With the average being 6.7.
Thank you. And then we've also heard from the last intervener two's last witness panel about concerns about sort of a catastrophic impact to the surrounding, for example, Pickett Pond and Pleasant Lake. Can you talk about what further analysis will be done in connection with that risk?
Sure. My understanding is under Chapter 200, a detailed evaluation of a potential catastrophic risk would need to take place under a scenario, in this case, probably impacts to the surface water bodies such as Pickett Mountain Pond. And a scenario would be developed as far as water quality impacts, potential other ecological impacts, and what those would be, and a cost estimate would be developed.
And what type of data goes into that analysis?
A lot of data, anywhere from climatic data, what the circumstances are when the event happens, soil chemistry data, surface water, or water data from the actual impacted water, and then the water quality within, say, Pickett Mountain Pond, and then any data from impacts to things like fish species, so on.
And would there be the potential to impact Pleasant Lake?
There could be, but I think that would be pretty far extreme and probably not within the scope of a catastrophic event at Pickett Mountain Mine.
And does that have anything to do with where the watershed divide is?
It does. The watershed divide runs across the site. The storage ponds and the ore storage is all on the Pickett Mountain Pond side of the drainage. So if there were an event, everything would go in that direction.
Thank you. I want to return to Dr. Finley for a moment. There were, I think from a number of commissioners, questions on, are there any examples of mines that have been successful and are not contaminating surrounding resources? Could you comment on just whether there are some examples that you're aware of?
Sure. I have two for you. One is an open pit mine, and remember I spent a lot of time talking about the fact that an open pit mine is not comparable, but for purposes of talking about successful mining operations, this is a good example. It is the Fort Knox mine, which is in Alaska, and it's a very large mine. I think they run upwards of 16,000 tons of ore processed per day. Again, it's a very large open pit, so they have waste rock piles. They have a wet tailing impoundment. It's a very large tailing impoundment. The dam is probably 100 to 200 feet high, so it's a very large feature. And they are located kind of in the headwaters of the catchment where they are mining ore, so it's comparable from that perspective. They have not had any environmental issues over the course of their mining operation, which has been for tens of years. The other example is from a small underground mine in Quebec called Louvecourt. And as I mentioned, it is an underground, well, it wasn't an underground mine. It
Dr. Finley,
operated
could you repeat the name of that mine for me?
Yeah,
please?
I know. It's Louvecourt.
Do you want to spell it?
Sure, go ahead, Jeremy.
It's L-O-U-V-E-C.
Yeah. L-O-U?
Oh, you turned off the mic.
Feel like it's a spelling bee. L-O-U-V-I-C-R-O-U-T. Louvecourt.
Could you use it in a sentence? Continue, Dr. Finley.
Okay. So underground mine operated from 1994 to 2005. It is closed. They used backfilling techniques there as well, but they also have a wet tailing impoundment, and it's a sulfide deposit similar to Pickett Mountain. And what they've used for their wet tailing to control it in closure is actually to put a water cover over the top of it. And if you remember my triangle or Dr. Mace's equation, oxygen is one of the main components for sulfide oxidation. So by placing a water cover over the tailing, even though it's a wet tailing impoundment, if you have a water cover, that prevents oxygen from interacting with the materials. And it's been proven to be very effective for long-term management and control, prevention of acid mine drainage. So again, a small underground mine that has been closed successfully. They don't have any measurable environmental impact. Right. Oh, yes. So they didn't put all the material back underground, and that is a difference with Pickett Mountain. So they do have waste rock that's stored on surface, and they have to manage that. So they have had acid mine or acid rock drainage form with those. It has not discharged to the environment. They've been able to manage the seepage from those. And as part of their closure activities, they're actually consolidating all of those in one location and placing a proper cover over it.
Thank you. Mr. Little, there were some questions, and there might have been some confusion about Wolfden's Manitoba projects. Can you just describe what those are?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think the clarification is about what's an operation versus an exploration project. So Wolfden is an explorer developer, and all of our properties are considered exploration development properties, but none of them are operating mines. So don't be confused with operating versus an exploration property.
Thank you. And could you describe the next phase of work that Wolfden would do? And in particular, there were some comments about why hasn't Wolfden done the additional analyses that, for example, Dr. Finley and Dr. Mace have both discussed, and that would need to be done to fully characterize the site, fully evaluate the risks of acid mine drainage?
Yeah, good question. I think I'll break that into two. So far, after buying the property, we've spent at least $8 million doing all the work that has led up to the PEA. So that includes about 17 to 20,000 meters of drilling. We've done all this engineering and detailed work that goes into the PEA, and all of that, came to a conclusion. The PEA is an independent document that we need in Canada as a way to qualify the work we've done for investors. And all of that work has told us we're very comfortable now to go on to the mining stage. And that's the very nature of a preliminary assessment. And the reason why you spend this $8 to $10 million to get to that point is because the next part of the study work is what we'd call a full feasibility study, which includes all this baseline work, It includes all this rock characterization, the hydrogeology, all the work that Doug's going to do on the background of the baseline work, the flora, the fauna. That is going to be $15 to $20 million. And regardless of Maine, you wouldn't go do that full feasibility until you've done the PEA. So I know there's been question about the resources being inferred or indicated. We've done enough drilling. We know we're going to convert that inferred into indicated. It's just a matter of more drilling. And that additional 15 to 20 million is going to include about another 17,000 meters of drilling within the ore body we've already outlined, just to confirm that it's there before we do our mine plan. So it's a two-step approach, but it's a considerable amount of money, which is why we're here on this commission, is to let, now we want to go to proceed to do all that work. And coincidentally, that just falls under the Chapter 200 format.
And there were questions about, and you just mentioned the inferred versus indicated resources. I think it's 50% inferred, 50% indicated in the PEA. Is that typical, unusual for a PEA level study?
No, actually, the basis of an inferred, again, this is a Canadian regulation. It all stemmed out of a previous, fraud within the mining industry, so we've got an extremely tight regulation of what we can call ore. And the nature of a PEA is you can have 100% inferred. We've got 50% indicated, and we've got a type of ore body that's very continuous. Not every ore body's the same, and some require very tight drill density. Others require less. And the 50% inferred can be upgraded by just tightening up the drill density. So that's why we put more holes in between the other holes to qualify that the level of confidence is still there.
Thank you. I think that's all I have, unless you want Mr. Willett to provide any additional detail on the half-mile photographs, if that would be helpful.
Leo. Thank you. I understand yesterday it seemed like there was some sort of discourse as it pertained to the samplings between Dr. Mays and what you had presented. Could you possibly explain that further as it pertains to the number of samplings, where they were taken? Essentially, it's the research method, correct?
Well, the answer is yes, I'll do that. It's a matter of, I think everyone in the room, and certainly on Wolfden's side, acknowledge that, that ore will be PAG. That will be the characteristic of that material. So does that mean we will not sample it? No, we will sample it, and we'll confirm that. We'll confirm its geochemical characteristics. The point of the discussion with Dr. Mace, and I agree with her in general in terms of...
Can I just interrupt for 1 minute?
Yeah,
and
sure.
just clarify? I believe you're asking about the 7 acid-base tests that were conducted. And Dr. Mace noted that they didn't conduct them within the ore, but they conducted them outside of the ore.
Actually, to the best of my recollection, it had to do more with the number of samples, the core drillings that were taken as it pertains to the number that were tested.
Thank you.
And I was heading that direction, but thank you for the
You're ahead of me.
clarification. So one of the requirements of geochemical characterization is that you in fact collect samples and analyze of all the categories of mine rock that may occur. So ore, waste rock, tailing, well, those are the main categories, actually. So it's important to also do that in the context of the geology that exists, and Dr. Mace described the different colors of the cross-section. Each of those different colors represents a different type of rock, and Mr. Dudek had samples of a few of those. So the question of how many samples do you have of each rock type is also tied to the mine plan, which is to say if there's rock type A and there will only be a very small amount of that material excavated during the mining activity, you don't need as many samples to characterize it. Whereas rock type B, which may comprise most of the waste rock, you need to have more samples. And there are guidelines for the number of samples appropriate to the amount of rock that's taken. Okay, so that's just fundamentally how the geochemical characterization and thinking about representativeness, right? We talked a lot about modeling and making projections, and Yogi Berra said it best, it's predictions hard, especially about the future. But I mean, that is something we have to do necessarily. So the number of samples, the focus of the initial program is, and those 7 samples, was again, not to look at the ore, because we know what the ore is right now, and we're fairly confident about that. What we really need to understand better is the rock that's outside the ore zone, because we'll have to go through some of that material. The number of samples that have been collected to date, 7, is a start. It's an indicative measure of what the geochemical properties of the rock are. That in conjunction with a much larger data set that Mr. Dudek has, plus his geological observations of the core, because they look at every inch of the core in terms of mineralogy and properties of the core, provide the basis for the statements currently made with regard to the geochemical characteristics of the different lithologies. Again, all of that will have to be confirmed with the appropriate amount of samples relative to the amount of different rock types that are removed.
Can I just add something to that? Sorry, just for further clarification, when we drill through the ore body, as an explorer, we take a sample and send it to the lab. At the exploration stage, we're not looking at ARD or anything like that. Just to run that sample for metals is roughly $35 to $40 per sample. So we don't start to do the ARD until once we decided to go into the PEA, then we decided where those 7 samples were. And because we've drilled, let's call it 200 holes through the rock, we see hole by hole that the rock is quite consistent. So once you see that piece of core and you've taken an ARD sample, you can now look at the other 200 holes and say, we've got that in another 80 holes, it's the same rock. So at the early stages of a PEA, you don't have to take 100 samples of the rock that you already see is the same. So that's part of the nature of the PEA. Once you've confirmed it's in your liking, then you go on and do the more detailed work in the feasibility study with the more characterization.
Thank you, that helps a lot.
I have a totally different topic. Are we, a question to ask Mr. Roulette there. Is that okay to move on to something totally different?
Oh, this is all your time now.
Okay.
I'm done.
So how many years will Wolfden actually be a presence in this area? And I'd say, doing the Pickett Mountain Mine project. And when they will actually be employing a fair number of people. How many years are we talking? I know you had a schedule there, but I guess I need clarification on that.
Great, thank you. So to clarify, is it how long until we anticipate to start employing majority of the workforce?
Yeah, I mean, you talk about all these jobs you're going to be, you're going to need, and I'm just kind of wondering what span of time is that? And I know this is maybe an estimate, but
so
the majority of those.
Our best estimate so far with relation to the work that's required under rezoning and the duration of that, and then the duration of work required to theoretically get a mine permit, assuming everything is, favorable, is between the 4 to 5 year kind of time frame. And certainly leading up to the latter end of that is when we'd be hoping to be, training and recruiting and that sort of activities, so that during the construction phase, there's that 2-year period of construction of the asset. Those would be, via local contracts of skill sets that exist here. And then after that construction phase is when we would be ramping up into that where I summarize sort of the types of employment that would be happening over the steady state 10-year operation. At which point it would be, in this particular case at the mine, we're estimating around 233 people. And I had mentioned as well, roughly a sort of a 2-year ramp-up period of starting with an existing skill set somewhere, throughout the state to come in and work with our trainees, let's call them, and increase the experience and skill set locally. And then ultimately transitioning that directly to local workforce.
And then you've got closure.
Yep.
Which is how many years?
Between 2 and 3 years of reclamation, which would also be done using local contracts, trained local workforce, because again, you're dismantling steel buildings, you're pulling up foundations, redoing earthworks, and then revegetating the site. So those are all skill sets that exist here as well.
So after closure, there's monitoring that continues, and I assume that's much reduced number of people involved in that.
Yeah, so that, perpetual monitoring would be done, on a frequency that's decided and approved by the DEP. But once that schedule is established, then obviously the workforces support that as established as well. And, but yeah, it's certainly minimized relative to the 233 people that would be working at the operation during the operating period.
So I'm trying to put together the socioeconomic impacts in the area, and based on the length of time that you're going to be actually providing a lot of employment and a lot of other activity going on. And it sounds like, so you have the 10 years, and then you working backwards, or 10, 11, 12. What are we talking when you add all that up?
So 14 or 15 years.
14 or 15
all
years.
in, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think in Michael Levert's testimony, it was 14 years. Yeah.
Okay. And within that time period, it's possible that another company may come in and, I don't know what the right terminology is, but buy out or become a manager for this facility. And that's correct, isn't it?
Great question. I'm glad you asked that. I'll just add one more thing to the 14-year period. There is lots of potential in Maine for more deposits. I think you've heard of the lithium deposit down near Newry as well. So we intend to take the funds that we're making out of Pickett Mountain and to continue to explore. When you develop a workforce in a new jurisdiction with as much potential as Maine has for more ore bodies, we hope to parlay that into finding more projects. And right now, there probably would be more companies exploring in Maine if the permitting process was a little more simple. So I think companies are watching us to see how we get through this process of first the commission now, then how we would deal with Chapter 200. It won't be until only after that, or at least I don't anticipating any corporate transaction until we get through the DEP process. Because this has been, to be honest, quite an elaborate affair that's a bit unusual in the mining industry. And I think, having the video, people are going to be watching and saying, that's quite a remarkable thing. You guys are on the path to perhaps success. We're going to wait till you get through the next phase too. So I don't think we're going to see any corporate transaction until we get through those two things. And I think knowing a bit about Chapter 200, if somebody were to acquire Wolfden, they have to absolutely commit to all the things that we have committed to. So if we sign a permit and we do all of our commitments essentially under a corporate transaction, that company absorbs Wolfden in as a subsidiary, and effectively I could see Wolfden carrying on as the operator in the state, even though it's a subsidiary of another company. So all of the requirements that we have to follow for operating are still going to be, you know, a requirement of whoever steps in behind us as a partner.
I see. Do you consider your company primarily involved in development and less involved in the actual operation?
No, it's been my quest in my career, since we're sort of focused in on such a small group, is to build mines. But I am at the mercy of a public market. And
Yeah.
as you go to a new jurisdiction and you develop a great project, that's usually when a bigger company comes along and says, thanks for all the good work and all the effort, but here's an offer to buy you out. And because I don't personally own the company, the shareholders do, they basically put out a public offer, and then if the shareholders accept it, there has to be a transaction. But myself, Jeremy, I mean, we've got a track record of operating and building mines, and we would love to turn Wolfden into a much larger company that can continue to keep exploring in this state, because we love the potential, we like the people. We've spent 5 years getting to know the local people. You know, these things take a lot of time, but you get quite involved and endeared with the community. So our passion is to stay here.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I have just a question for staff. It is my understanding, and this is a little confusing, I think, sometimes, that LUPC, this issue of socioeconomic impacts, is looked at LUPC as, and DEP does not really, that's not really something that they get into. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So I mean, do you want to clarify that?
Sorry, I gotta keep pushing mine down. We definitely have standards in Chapter 12 that address socioeconomic concerns. And typically, DEP doesn't address those things, but what I want to clarify is I don't have a strong understanding of all of the standards in Chapter 200, which is a little different than some of the other, the rules that DEP administers. So I'd have to want to clarify that for you in terms of whether they've pulled in any socioeconomic standards into Chapter 200.
I guess my point here is that there are certain things that our agency, organization looks at that the DEP Chapter 200 rules probably do not address. And so when we say that, you know, we'll pass it on to the next agency because they have all these strong rules, there are certain things that we as an agency have to look at. How am I sounding? Am I getting out of line there, Council? Okay. And I guess that's the point I really wanted to make. So this discussion is very important to us. You know, not that they all aren't. Thank you.
Can I beg to add to your commentary on that? I'd only go back to the comment because of your question about the takeover, because we've heard from particularly the opposition about how small we are and that we're a Canadian company and we're trying to become Maynards. But I think, you know, if a transaction were to happen, it's likely going to be by a much bigger company. It might actually make, you know, people more comfortable with the bigger balance sheet, a bigger track record, and of course, to me, that only adds to the socioeconomic benefits, perhaps, or the comfort level thereof. So I think that's all part of your upside in allowing us to get through to the next stage, is that there will be other companies looking to come to Maine, which to me is attractive for this whole region.
Leo, did you have a comment?
Yes, I have another question. Since we're talking about projections and current market conditions, as well as, and you brought it up, the balance sheet. I did not see anything that pertained to your financial viability as it pertains to your financial statements. And I was wondering if that is something that you could actually bring to the table at some point. You're traded publicly, so I'm assuming that you have audited financial statements. And basically, again, I see what your projections are more of a mark-to-market type of accounting, as opposed, and it's based upon what the future might be and what the future will bring, as opposed to what you are now. And your book value is something I think, again, you brought it up.
Yeah.
A firm with a larger balance sheet would maybe add more credibility. I don't mean that in a negative way, but it certainly presents a comfortability level for, I believe, everyone.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things I want to address here. First, we are public and all of our financials are, our annual statements are audited. The quarters are not reviewed at this stage because we're a small cap company, but they're filed on a CDR. They're also on our website, so you can see all of our financials. There's a statement in there that the opposition's used that related to going concern. We put in there, not our auditors, that, there is a risk that we can't raise money next year because all of the money we've raised is, most of it except for our timber revenue is raised by issuing shares. And that is done by, the attractiveness of our properties in the company. So Pickett Mountain is our, what we call the flagship. And so the value of that, much like our investor related to, is there's a great comfort level that the asset is very real. It can be a mine. Now we're at a stage is, can you get a permit? So if we were to get through rezoning, I expect our stock price to go up. And that allows us to raise the 15 to 20 million to do the execution. Behind us is a major company. Kinross, the Fort Knox mine that was mentioned, is one of our biggest shareholders. They're looking at us saying, this is an attractive asset, it's an attractive belt, we'll support you with your efforts. Because we're the guys down here on the ground trying to get through the permitting in a new jurisdiction. Altius is an intermediate sized company. They're also a financial backer. So we've got really 40% of our investors in, Mr. Feeler, who is here, is 20, let's call it. Kinross is close to 10, and Altius is about 10. So they're our cornerstone investors to see that we progress. And it's not until we get to close to the final permit, and in fact, what we would expect is the DEP would say, okay, we're going to give you, we've reached through to the permit approval, but you can't start until you put all the money up front as part of the assurance bond. At that point in time, we're ready to fully finance, and that's when the funding comes in to do all the work. So it is a progression to get there, and we expect our market cap to improve as we get through each milestone. And then, sorry, just before I forget, I think you were alluding to our projections. Whether it's the PEA or the full feasibility, it's all based on the same metal price assumption. So you'd heard we used a 3-year running metal average. You do that in the PEA and you do that in the feasibility because you can't really predict the future. And so all the revenues are based that way, but then you put in all the assumptions on your costs and your recoveries. I mean, there's quite a bit of information. We'd love to show you a spreadsheet on how we do it, but there's many different tabs for all the different costs. And even in the PEA, we used, real quotes. A to Z Mining went out and got real quotes for many of the capital price items. The big ticket items they were quoted for, and then he also researched the current labor rates in the USA. So I know he referred to it as a pretty good guess, but I'd beg to differ. There was a lot of work that went into that PEA.
I would look forward to that, to the report and what you're willing to share.
Okay.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
So just so I'm clear, do you want us to, I mean, the financial statements are public. Do you want us to actually provide a copy of the most recent audited financial statement so that it's in the record?
Yeah, I think to the extent Commissioner Trudell would like to see that, I think it should be part of the record.
Okay,
And
we'll
I think
do that as follow-up to the hearing. That was in the PEA. And are you also asking for the financial model that went into the PEA, the spreadsheet that Mr. Little referred to?
If you're willing to yes.
Yes, so we'll
Yes,
follow up
deliver
with
it.
that as well.
That
So
would be great.
Two follow-up
Thank you.
items, thank you.
I'll just add, because it's going in the record, it won't be the working Excel spreadsheet. You know, you'll see all the numbers, but you won't be able to work it. Yeah. Well, it's actually proprietary as well. The mining companies kind of keep their working sheet to themselves to a certain degree because you develop this over time with a lot of experience. Yeah.
Let me give you a history lesson. Back in the day, the LUPC made all the decisions in the unorganized territory on every project. As time progressed and projects got more complex, things changed. The LUPC has 25 employees to do, and we zone and permit 10.4 million acres with 25 people. And we make all these decisions about development within the unorganized territory with 25 people. Well, the legislature said things are getting too complicated. So they started out with large-scale developments. So if we have some developments that are over, how many lots?
30 acres.
Residential is 15 lots and 30 acres.
Okay, 15 lots and 30 acres. It's bumped over to the DEP. They've got 300 or so employees. They got a lot more expertise. Then all of a sudden, there's some interest in mining. We've got the same situation. We got 25 people who don't know anything about mining. They've got over 300, and a lot of them are specialists in a lot of areas. So the legislature passed Chapter 200, or whatever it is. So we're kind of in a bind with some of these dual project improvement situations. They leave us to say, yes, you need to rezone this in order for example, Wolfden to progress to the DEP. But we have all these regulations as well, socioeconomic and environmental issues and all this. So we're in a quandary sometimes ourselves. How in-depth do we need to have information to rezone when we know under Chapter 200, all of these things we wish we had, we'll have in hindsight, because you'll have to develop it for them. So it's complicated to, and I brought this up yesterday, where is the line when enough is enough for rezoning versus enough is enough for the real deal? So that's my spiel before I have my ending spiel. All right?
Yeah, Juliet, on that note, am I allowed to say thank you to the commission?
We're going to take a break and have potential questioning.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
I forgot.
I have
Do you want a break first? Or?
We have like 10 minutes to just discuss and
Okay.
figure out.
I think that's fair. Okay. And Stacy has some questions as well. go ahead with yours, Stacy, and then you folks can come up.
Thank you. Dr. Maest in her testimony seemed to indicate that most mines use dewatering wells. Dr. Finley, do you have an example of a modern mine that doesn't use dewatering wells and is successful?
It depends on the type of mine. Most underground mines do not use dewatering wells. And I believe Louvercourt did not, but I would have to check that. Almost every single open pit mine uses dewatering wells.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
And you mentioned in the redirect that if there's additional neutralization needed when you're backfilling, that the waste rock could be amended. Yeah. Could you explain how that would happen?
Sure. I talked about this a little bit in my testimony, but it's possible to enhance the neutralizing capacity of backfill material beyond what may be naturally there by adding amendments, such as lime. So lime, again, we talked about that. I won't go into it again, but that is a method that's commonly used in the mining industry.
Thank you. And last one, are there any other effective or emerging best management practices that would prevent or mitigate for acid mine drainage in the mine that we haven't met hearing?
I think some of the other people testifying have alluded to several things that are kind of in the works. There are people who have spent their entire career looking for ways to manage bacteria, for example. And it turns out there actually are ways to do it. So I'll just tell you that if you spray sour milk on, on the rock, it will kill the bacteria. So the trick is in many large mining operations, and that's where it becomes very important. If you have hundreds of thousands of tons of material you're managing, how do you do that? So a smaller operation has a better potential to think about doing something like that. So that's managing the bacteria part of the triangle that actually has 4 parts to it. There's ways to limit precipitation interaction with the rock. So to essentially keep it dry or to limit the amount of water that can migrate, filtrate through the rock. So for example, a mine in Peru that I was at, very large gold mine, has and again, different operation, different process, but fundamentally they're managing rainfall input, and this is where having a workforce comes in handy, by actually spreading plastic over this gigantic heap leach pad that's got to be a half a mile long and on a very steep slope. So they have people actually hauling plastic out over this heap leach pad to limit the amount of precip they get in their system. So there are other ways to do that by adding sealants to the surface, for example, of a waste rock pile to, again, prevent or limit the amount of water going into it. So some of those are things that are great ideas but are not practical in large operations. Some of them are just need some additional test work to implement. But the target is, and Dr. Mace mentioned it, prevent it in the first place. That's the best measure. Then you have a list of mitigation measures. You don't walk into any of these programs with a single mitigation. You have a playbook of mitigation measures that you're ready to implement if conditions warrant.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll go with Leo.
Just one more. But I want to say every commissioner has had a farm here, so or farmed at some point. And where I'm going with this is we've all used lime, probably purchased it,
Yeah.
And it's heavy. And my question is, I'm assuming that you have not included the amount of lime that would be needed in order to continue with the processing if you were to go down that road. How much lime are you talking about, and how many truckloads are you looking at on a consistent basis? And I realize that it's going to vary
Yeah.
based upon
Well,
parameters.
and if I could, sorry, ask you a question back. I realize that doesn't happen, but just for clarification, are you talking about lime that could be used as an amendment as part of an ARD metal leaching plan, or for the operation side?
I guess both, but I was thinking more in terms of the ARD.
Yeah.
But I guess both, because if, it's additional trucking, right?
It is, sure. Yeah, well, let me start, and then I'll hand it off to Ron. He has thoughts on this, and it's important that he speak to it, actually, because I can speak to it from the standpoint that this goes into the characterization program, and something that has to be known beforehand, right? Because you can't just find yourself all of a sudden going, boy, we need lime, but you haven't set up the infrastructure, contracts, et cetera, to even get it, right? So that's where the characterization program comes in. And through that, they'll develop we will develop an understanding of how much potential there is for there to be a need for lime. At which point, then you put pencil to paper and basically do the hand calculation to decide. So I can't answer you specifically.
Well, and
right.
and you make all kinds of projections. It seems to me like this is a worthy projection, even if it's only an industry standard.
Right.
Of course, so so lime, treatment of the wall rocks is sort of one of those components that Dr. Finley described as part of an overall toolbox, along with the sour milk and that sort of stuff. But in terms of the operation, we did describe a portion of our backfill as cemented backfill, and obviously sort of like cement as a neutralizing agent as well, which would be another part of that toolbox, not specifically described as the ARD management isn't specifically described as the purpose for cemented rockfill, but it is a good byproduct of cemented rockfill. And in the case of our operation, that is described as roughly 50% of the backfill that's used for the mine excavations, and that is built into sort of our cost model. Yep.
Can I go a little further?
Yeah,
And let's
please.
talk about cement for a minute. You've mentioned it on a number of occasions that, we'll put some, do you mean cement as in, I'm going to build a foundation cement?
Yeah, it's typically type 10 Portland cement.
Okay, and so what happens, if I understand you correctly, is that you basically take the cement down there and you cement everything together that's left over so that nothing happens and it just sits there inertly as a lump?
Yeah, so I mentioned the neutralizing potential by the cement is sort of a byproduct of the original plan for using it. And the way that we apply the cement is, I mentioned the stopes or the mining blocks. They happen in sequence to one another. And in order to excavate adjacent to one of the, call it primary mining blocks, you consolidate it. And to do that, you use cement. And essentially, that's what we're doing, is we're creating a concrete block. And by doing that, now you can mine adjacent to it and not impact sort of the backfill that was there. Because otherwise, obviously, the backfill would just run into the stope that you're trying to mine out. So it's a mechanical, structural management technique. Yeah. You're welcome.
You're up.
Can we have our 10 minutes to discuss what we want to ask?
You need 10 minutes to discuss what you want to ask, yes. Take a break, people.
guess
Do people still do that? Yeah. We're just waiting for one of our attorneys to get back.
Let me know when you're ready.
So we'll split the questioning because there are multiple witnesses between me, the witnesses that I sort of handled, and Peter for the witnesses that he had prepared to handle.
That's fine.
Thank you. So, Mr. Finley, are you aware that since that in 2021, in February of 2021, the LUPC staff asked Wolfden to provide an example of comparable mines that could accomplish what Wolfden is proposing to accomplish here?
Sorry, that was a question?
Yes.
Am I aware of that?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. And in 2020, were you aware that the Maine Geological Survey sent a letter requesting examples of mines that were comparable that could accomplish what Wolfden is proposing to accomplish today?
No.
Okay. And so, you've provided some examples today, but those examples were not listed in the application materials, correct?
Correct.
And not in your pre-filed testimony, correct?
Correct.
And so, we may have more we have to say. We can't, research these mines in 10 minutes. I just have a quick question about Fort Knox you mentioned. That's in Alaska.
It is.
And that's a gold mine, correct?
Yes.
And that gold mine, according to the U.S. Geological Survey, has low sulfide content, the deposit, correct?
I don't know the exact.
Okay. So in my 10 minutes, I'll say that the U.S. Geological Survey website for that says low sulfide content mine. Low sulfide content, and as sulfide is typically what is produces acid, or what could produce acid mine drainage, correct?
Yes, and I think it's important to distinguish when we talk high sulfide, low sulfide, that's specific to the ore. That is not talking about the sulfide halo or alteration halo that surrounds the deposit. So whether you're in Fort Knox or Pickett, the ore is what's going to be extracted and removed. It's the acid rock drainage probability is as much associated with what the sulfide alteration halo looks like. So I can tell you right now that in many kinds of hard rocks, a sulfide content of 1 weight %, which I would consider a relatively small number, could actually cause acid rock drainage. So, whether the ore deposit itself is high sulfide or low sulfide, to me it is important in the overall story, but it's the sulfide alteration halo around the ore body that is equally important.
And that's something you said needs further study, correct?
Correct.
Now, just speaking quickly about Louvacourt, that been closed since 2005, correct?
Yes.
And it was your testimony that a lot has changed since 2005, and you're actually relying on a lot of new technologies or techniques since 2005, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to hand it over to counsel afterward.
Could I just clarify that Dr. Finley's testimony of those two mines were just in response, I think, to Commissioner Hilton's question about are there mines that are successful? We're not saying that those mines are, you know, doing exactly what Pickett would do.
Mr. Little, let me just start. So just to follow up on Commissioner Trudell's question, there are audited financial statements, and then you have unaudited financial statements, correct?
Every year, our statements are audited on an annual basis. In some quarters could be reviewed for other companies, but as a small company, we don't review the quarters.
And you submit for the Canadian securities folks, you've submitted documents which are quarterlies that are unaudited, correct?
Correct, yeah.
And you've also submitted statements having to do specifically with this project, right?
Yeah, every quarter we talk about our projects.
And then you also have what's called the management discussion of that, and all of those are submitted to the Canadian securities authorities and discussing what's going on with regard to the company, correct?
Those are filed on CDAR.
Correct.
It's not necessarily the Securities Commission, but they're filed like every other public company.
Be the equivalent of filing on EDGAR in the United States under the SEC.
Like a Q10.
Let me just suggest, that one of the things that we could supplement the record with were some of these unaudited statements about the project, all of which were just filed with that.
I'd also qualify that there's no difference from what we say in an unaudited quarter versus the annual.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, I understand. But further information that would be helpful to the LUPC as they make decisions under their criteria, one of which has to do with the financial capability of the company.
Yeah, I mean, the statements clearly show what our balance sheet is
Understood.
and where we have spent our money.
I'm going to cut you off because I have limited time.
No problem.
You said there's no chance, your likely takeover possibility or takeover premium would occur once you can get yourself through the permitting process. And at that point, one of the folks who might be able to take you over might be one of these large mining companies, correct?
A larger company who's interested in the project.
And one of your strategic partners who you described as a larger company is Kinross, correct?
It is.
And so Kinross is, and so one of the things would be whether or not they have the same values or the same promises that Wolfden has made in this application, correct?
Yeah, my simple thought on Kinross is they are the same or as we are, same kind of
And when you
commitment.
say the same, so that would, the commission could take into consideration that they had, according to pre-filed exhibits, over 3,000 violations of their mine in the state of Washington, correct?
This, you're referring to the Buckhorn mine?
Yeah, that is part of the history, right?
This is their own issue, not our issue.
absolutely.
And the 3,000 plus violations are a day. My understanding is for every day that
It's not whether
something has
it's a big
gone by,
violation.
that's a
Excuse
violation.
me. I know, but one of the things that they could also take into account, which we have in hearing exhibit number 35, is that there were a $45 million payment on a Superfund site on a mine that they did in Colorado. Are you aware of that?
No.
Okay. Are you aware of, in hearing exhibit number 34, that they ended up paying $950,000 in civil penalties for violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act for their dealings with mining in Africa? You aware of that?
No, but it's not a given that they're actually going to take us over. So what does their record have to do with us?
Could I just clarify, are those exhibits, are they in the record? Or is this
I've
the
just
first?
identified them for it to be put into the record.
Well, okay, in all fairness, I think you need to provide the exhibit to the witness and let the witness just comment on the exhibit.
He said he wasn't familiar with it. So in terms of, you talked a little bit about what a good ore body this is. Oh. You talked, and one of the, but look, you do recognize that under the requirements for a PEA, under the Canadian securities laws, that by definition, all mineral that is listed as inferred is deemed to be too speculative to be considered as an economic resource, correct?
You're misleading people here because that is a definition within a PEA so that people don't get confused between a PEA and a feasibility study. So the fact that we have used inferred, you have to qualify that these don't qualify as reserves and other levels. So it's a qualifying statement that's in every PEA.
And the qualifying statement appears in the PEA for this particular project on page 517.
I don't know what page it's on, but it's in every PEA.
Excuse me, is 517 on the record?
Yes, it's part of the application.
Okay.
Yeah.
And your time's getting short.
I totally recognize that. And with regard, lastly, to the jobs, there's no written guarantee that Wolfden or somebody else will actually provide any of these jobs, correct?
I disagree. If this mine gets built, there will be jobs. You can't build and run a mine without the said jobs that we have. And I'd say it's a pretty good estimate for the size that we've predicted, plus or minus 15%.
Although the PEA says 40%.
Sure.
And as the time has expired,
Witness in case he wants to.
but you do recognize that in 2020, in one of these statements that went to the Canadian folks, that it was here in Exhibit 14, that they said it was a total of 60 jobs that would come out of this project.
What's hearing Exhibit 14?
That is the, it's a management discussion of the results.
Yeah, I think I know what you're getting at. You're talking to the first application.
Correct.
And the 60 jobs was not an error, by the way. Thank you for the question. It's great to clarify.
Let's not add any more random exhibits here.
Yeah. And so back to the question, Council's alluding to our first PEA where 60 jobs was mentioned, and we did have to clarify that with questions from LUPC staff. That was one shift only. It wasn't including a cross shift, which needed to be doubled. And I think in the document or in our correspondence, we qualified that. But I think you might as well stick to the current application is where I think we should be.
You would agree with me that if you go from the original exhibit, hearing Exhibit 14 of what you're discussing about this mine, it was a prediction of 60 jobs. It goes to 100, and it goes to 233 today.
No, it was you're misinterpreting the 60 as it did not include the second shift. We described it as one shift, and people somehow have misinterpreted the second shift.
We'll obviously leave it to the LUPC to sort out who's reading the document.
Thank you very much for your question.
Thank you, people. You people are excused.
I guess on that note, I'd like to lighten it up and thank all of you for having us and all of your questions. We really have kind of looking forward to this for 5 years to tell you about the project, tell you about what we want to do. And, you know, Tim and Stacy and the staff have been terrific to work with. And of course, we would have loved to have you all up to the property to show you the property because I think that would help to see the local area and the woods. And I would encourage you to go up there at your leisure. The door is always open. There's no gate. So thank you to the staff. Thank you to the AV department for putting this together. And even thanks to trying to be civil with the rest of the opposition. And we appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I hate to end on a more boring procedural note, but Ms. Brown, did you intend to object to any of those exhibits that were mentioned? I think we've largely been operating off of a admitted, if not objected to, framework.
I guess this leads to what can be submitted after today. If there's an opportunity for us just to respond to these exhibits as part of the post-hearing submissions, then I don't object. If there's, I mean, my understanding is the record will be left open and the parties are allowed to provide information responsive just to the issues that came up in the hearing. or the public comment session. And if I'm accurate in that assumption, then I'm okay with these in the record.
Well, the parties provided a timeline for briefing. I guess I don't know that we directly addressed whether or not they could also submit additional materials in the time when it's open for public comment.
That wasn't my understanding. My understanding was if you haven't submitted it by now, it's over.
Then I object to these exhibits.
Well, if Mr. Little wants to take a look at them and respond, there were questions based on them, given the short time period that we had. If he wants to just take a look at them now, and then he can respond if he has anything.
Well,
if Ms. Brown has objected, I think that's suffice.
Yeah, we haven't had much of a chance to review these exhibits. I think maybe what would make the most sense is we could address that objection in a procedural order after we got a chance to look at them more fully.
Okay. That sounds good to me.
If I could clarify, an objection has to be sustained, and so we'd want an opportunity to respond to the objection. So if the basis of the objection is it's irrelevant, or?
I think what happened here was I went beyond where I should have gone, letting one side, which was on the record, and then letting you folks back in because they agreed to it. So at that point, I think I thought anyway, we were dealing with what was already on the record. And all of a sudden, we had several more documents that was mentioned, but not in the context of, I'd like to submit this document and ask questions about it.
I understand that, and Chairman, but part of this was in the nature of cross-examination. You don't know what you're going to use until you hear the direct testimony of the witnesses. So most of the material that we used was in the record. There were some things that were used as part of the cross-examination, which came from public records. And if we wanted to, we could go through a full evidentiary process of, here's the basis for it, here's why it's relevant, and then the objection could be it's irrelevant, or some other basis for that. But we haven't done that, and I think, as Caleb said, we were working under the understanding that, we provided materials ahead of time last week that we would both, we were planning on using, especially if they were new materials. We identified them, but we weren't sure we were going to use all of them. So we didn't enter all of them into evidence at the time. So I think that's where, if there are documents now that Wolfden or Haynes objects to.
If I could see them, it would help a lot.
Understood. Object to, we could respond to the objections, and then you could make a ruling as to whether or not they go in the record or not.
You want to deal with this?
Okay,
I mean,
here's what I would
and
propose,
just-
I guess, is we'll give a limited period of time for both parties to state the basis for their objection, and then we'll issue a procedural order, and that will determine the exhibits. And if you also wouldn't mind providing a list of the exhibits that were introduced during this cross-session that were the subject of the objection. I'm not sure I followed all of them.
We have that, and we prepared something like that. And we can add the few that came in just now, and appreciate that. And also appreciate, Chairman, your ability to overrule yourself if you'd like. Thank you.
So we object to this on multiple grounds. Throughout this hearing, intervener 2 has flashed up exhibits, hasn't asked the witness questions or allowed the witnesses an opportunity to discuss the exhibit or put it into context. So, and to do the same thing on, recross, on redirect is fundamentally unfair, and these are not new issues. If they wanted to question Mr. Little about Kinross, they had ample opportunity to do so during the hearing. So I think it both goes beyond the scope of the limited redirect and is unfair because consistent with a number of their exhibits that they've introduced, it's just of, you know, here's an exhibit and then move on, and there's no opportunity for meaningful discussion of it.
Well, I think you'll be able to make that objection. We provided an opportunity for the parties to submit in writing their objection to those, and then we will rule on them following the hearing rather than all looking at them right now and coming to that conclusion. That'd be my proposal.
It's a relatively small universe of documents, and I think we could do that in short order.
And are you indicating that you'd like to object to additional ones that were introduced in earlier sessions, or is it still limited to the ones?
I was limiting it to this. I candidly, in the spirit of just trying to be cooperative, I haven't objected every single time they've done this, but I do find it problematic, and it's particularly problematic to do it on recross, on redirect at the end of the hearing.
Let's say 5 days, you can submit an offer of proof of why they should be omitted, and you can provide your objections and the basis within 5 days.
Thank you.
I wish to remind everyone that the record will remain open with written public comments until Thursday, November the 5th, 2023, and for an additional week until Thursday, November 9, 2023, for rebuttal testimony in response to the written public comments. Except for post-hearing briefs by the parties, and including this 5-day submission, which are due on November 21, 2023. No additional evidence or testimony will be allowed into the record after November 9. I hereby close the technical session of the public hearing on the Land Use Planning Commission's ZP779A. This hearing will be continued with the public comment section at 6:30 p.m. on October 23 at the Cross Insurance Center in Bangor. Thank you all. It's been an interesting 2.5 days and 2 evenings. Yes.
And Ms. Brown, which we concurred in on having to do with some other corporate documents that might be submitted. And I was under the impression that, first of all, we both agreed, and I think the commissioner asked for it, which had to do with these are publicly filed financials or other documents that are from the CEDAR. They call it CEDAR in Canada. And so. And I thought that, so that would be, other than that, the record would be closed. It was my understanding that that was what was actually agreed upon in response to the commissioner's question. It's a relatively small universe. I can think of about 5 or 6 of those. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me try it again. I need to get closer. Commissioner Trudell asked about getting some other additional corporate docs, some of which are not audited, and which Mr. Little described for us. And there are also some additional documents filed with the Canadian Security in their thing, CEDAR, which are about the project. And I thought that Ms. Brown asked that could she submit he wanted them. We're in favor of that. So it'd be a few more things.
Yeah, so I guess we were going to just provide the most recent annual audited statement. If you want more, we'll provide more. And then the second document was the spreadsheet in support of the economic analysis. We would also provide that, and we could provide both those documents certainly within a week.
I will just point out the audited financial for 2022 is already in the record. That was previously submitted, as was the corporates, the filing for first quarter, which is the only one available at least as of yesterday, for the company. So but there are the management statements about the financials, as well as some of the other specific documents subject to the Canadian securities laws filed about this project, which are,
I'm going to restrict it to the two documents